The Breeders' Cup stands as one of the pinnacle events of international thoroughbred horse racing, an annual gathering where the finest equine athletes compete before global audiences. It is an event known for both prestige and rigor, where every horse undergoes detailed scrutiny to ensure readiness and soundness before stepping onto the track. Yet even within that environment of regulation and procedure, the unexpected can occur. Such was the case with White Abarrio, the reigning 2023 Breeders' Cup Classic champion who was abruptly scratched from the Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile during the post-parade. The incident was not merely unexpected, but unprecedented in its timing and lack of immediate explanation, leading to confusion, frustration, and eventually formal action from his ownership group, C2 Racing Stable, LLC, and Gary Barber. Their public statement has sparked a heated debate about transparency, authority, and the delicate balance between equine safety and competitive integrity. White Abarrio's rise to fame was not one that began with privilege or certainty. Foaled in 2019, he was purchased as a yearling at a relatively modest price, and like many horses who ultimately find success, his early life provided no guarantees of what he would become. Through thoughtful conditioning, steady development, and careful management, he matured into a formidable competitor. His victory in the 2022 Florida Derby announced his presence on the national stage, but it was his triumph in the 2023 Breeders' Cup Classic that solidified his place in racing history. The Classic, one of the sport's most challenging and prestigious races, is reserved for only the finest older horses, and White Abarrio's win demonstrated not only speed and strength, but consistency and competitive courage. As he returned for another Breeders' Cup appearance, this time in the Dirt Mile, expectations were understandably high. In the modern racing landscape, particularly in the United States, safety protocols have evolved drastically in response to public concern and scrutiny. Regulatory veterinarians, private veterinary teams, racing officials, and track administrators all share responsibility in ensuring the welfare of every horse. In the days leading up to the Dirt Mile, White Abarrio underwent extensive evaluation, including a PET scan requested by Breeders' Cup veterinarians. The results of this scan, according to his ownership, displayed findings entirely within normal parameters for a horse in active race training. Additionally, White Abarrio was examined daily throughout race week, including the morning of the scheduled race. In each of these examinations, he was reportedly assessed as sound and fit to compete. On the morning of the race, no issues were raised regarding his health or condition. His rider, celebrated jockey Irad Ortiz Jr., later noted that White Abarrio warmed up smoothly and felt perfect beneath him. Those closest to the horse, who interact with his physical and behavioral condition daily, observed no concerns. Yet the scratch came suddenly, in a moment when the horse had already entered the post-parade, the traditional procession before loading into the starting gate. This is a highly unusual time for such a decision to be made. Typically, scratches occur earlier in the day when horses first arrive at the paddock or during pre-race veterinary checks. The abruptness of the call, combined with the lack of immediate explanation and complete absence of injury report, has left many within the industry questioning not only the decision itself, but the process by which it was made. In their formal response, C2 Racing Stable and Gary Barber expressed both confusion and disappointment regarding the decision to scratch their horse. Their letter emphasized that White Abarrio had complied fully with all requested and required veterinary protocols and that no physiological or structural issues had been identified. The owners acknowledged that the safety of the horse must always come first, and stated unequivocally that if there had been any credible medical evidence indicating that White Abarrio was unfit to run, they would have supported the scratch. However, in their view, and based on the information available to them at the time, no such evidence existed. The letter stated that neither the ownership nor the trainer, Safi Joseph Jr., was made aware of any specific concern leading up to the decision. To them, the scratch was not just unanticipated, but fundamentally unjustified. This dispute has opened a broader discussion within racing about the role and authority of regulatory veterinarians at high-profile race events. In recent years, particularly following well-publicized equine fatalities in California, racing commissions and regulatory bodies have adopted increasingly cautious policies, encouraging veterinarians to make scratch decisions whenever even the slightest irregularity is observed. While such measures have reduced the number of racing-related injuries, they have also created tension between veterinarians and horsemen. Trainers and owners argue that while caution is necessary, veterinary interpretation can be subjective, especially when based on movement assessment rather than clinical diagnostics. While regulation seeks to prevent catastrophic outcomes, excessive caution can impede competition, disrupt training schedules, and undermine the contributions of professional horsemen who work closely and consistently with the animals in their care. The Breeders' Cup later clarified that the final decision to recommend scratching a horse rests with the California Horse Racing Board's regulatory veterinarian. This means that even though White Abarrio's private veterinarians, the Breeders' Cup veterinary team, and the trainer saw no reason to withhold him from racing, one regulatory veterinarian had the legal authority to override all other evaluations. It remains unclear what the specific trigger for the decision was. No public record of observed lameness has been disclosed. No imaging results have been presented that would indicate injury. No explanation has yet been given to the ownership establishing what, if anything, the veterinarian observed in the post-parade that justified removal from the race. This lack of explanation is the central issue. Without transparency, the owners argue, the decision undermines not only their horse's competitive opportunity, but also the integrity and accountability of regulatory action. In response to this uncertainty, C2 Racing Stable and Gary Barber have retained legal counsel and requested that all relevant veterinary observations, internal communications, documented assessments, and procedural records be preserved and released for review. Their position is that only through open and detailed disclosure can the fairness and appropriateness of the decision be evaluated. Until that review is complete, they have announced that they will not be answering additional questions regarding the matter. The implications of this controversy extend beyond a single horse and a single race. White Abarrio had been conditioned and timed to reach peak performance for this event. The scratched race represented not only a major opportunity for earnings and career legacy, but a point around which his training schedule had been structured. Horses do not maintain peak conditioning indefinitely, and missing a key race can redirect or even halt momentum. Additionally, for a horse like White Abarrio, who is nearing the later stages of his racing career, each start contributes significantly to his future stud valuation. Thus, the decision carried financial, competitive, and historical consequences. At the same time, the welfare of the horse remains the ethical foundation of the sport. No one involved disputes the importance of preventing preventable injury. The question is not whether horses should be protected. They should, absolutely. The question is whether this specific instance of protection was based on evidence, or if it emerged from uncertainty, misinterpretation, or an overly cautious instinct in the absence of clear risk. The situation surrounding White Abarrio illustrates the tension central to contemporary horse racing governance. How to protect horses responsibly without undermining the sport itself. If regulatory veterinarians make decisions without transparency, trust between officials and horsemen erodes. If trainers and owners are not consulted or informed, collaborative welfare oversight becomes impossible. Conversely, if veterinarians hesitate to act decisively when genuine risk exists, horses could suffer preventable harm. The future of the sport depends on achieving a balanced and mutually respectful relationship among all parties. White Abarrio himself remains at the center of that unresolved tension. A champion, fully prepared to race, he stood quietly in the post-parade, unaware that forces beyond his control had already determined that he would not compete that day. His future campaign now depends not only on his physical readiness, but on the administrative and legal outcomes of the investigation now underway. As the review process continues, the racing world watches closely. Whether the decision to scratch White Abarrio will be remembered as a necessary act of veterinary caution or as a troubling example of procedural overreach remains to be seen. What is clear, however, is that the outcome of this dispute will influence racing policy, regulatory authority, and the expectations of transparency for years to come. The story is not yet finished, and its conclusion will shape not just the legacy of a single horse, but the future standards of the sport itself.